Okay, that should be a good break. So let's get into Module 2 here today. In Module 2, we're going to focus on how do we get work. If you've read the chapters in the Jackson book, you've learned a little bit about some of the terms that we use in getting work. But today we're going to talk about some of the real key elements of what makes our industry somewhat unique. You have to understand the development process in order to be able to understand how we get work. We mentioned last week that you must have an owner or a developer in the process. This owner is the one who perceives the need, who defines the scope, and who is responsible for financing and funding the overall project. No one builds without a goal in mind. And the owner and developer are the ones that set the goal for the particular type of project. Secondly, the owner, developer needs to hire an architect. Someone needs to help them get the scope into a manageable document and then be able to prepare those documents in order for the constructors to be able to actually implement the design. The third person is the construction manager. And the construction manager is a crucial element in protecting the owner's interest throughout the entire project. They're there to look at, from scope to occupancy, how is the owner receiving the services and benefits and the values for which they're contracting. We also have the lender. Most projects require the owner developer to invest some of their capital, but leverage is a key thing to the construction industry. If we can't borrow the money to add to the equity that the owner puts in, we won't be able to construct the project. Plus, you need to be aware that in the construction project, most mortgage lenders do not want to own a project that is under construction. So most mortgage commitments will be, we will commit to loan you X number of dollars, 60, 65, 70, 75% of the cost of the development, once the project is complete and the certificate of occupancy has been issued. Which means that the mortgage lender is one element that you work with, but you'll also be working with a construction lender who will work on what essentially is the working capital of the project that will be funding the interim construction on a month-by-month basis as the construction manager approves and the architect releases funds to the constructor. So the lender is an important player in here. The engineers who come up with the structure that helps us to assemble this design and to make sure that it meets the rigid structural requirements, the environmental requirements, electrical, mechanical, and plumbing requirements are all a key element to the development process. And then, of course, we do have the constructor. This is the firm or group of firms that are hired under the project delivery system to implement the design. And the last person that I consider to be crucial to the development process is the facilities manager. Now, quite often the owner-developer doesn't have a facility manager in mind, but once the building is up and occupied, it is the facility manager who needs to know how to operate and maintain that building in order to have it reach the design lifespan that the architect originally intended. So the owner developer is crucial, architect, construction manager, lender, engineers, constructor, and finally the facility manager. So we focus a lot in this course on the construction manager because he has such a strong team leading mode. His job is quite varied because he needs to be able to protect that owner's interest from beginning to end. The constructor, and there's some project delivery systems, can also be the construction manager at risk, but in most cases, the constructor is an independent general contractor or group of prime contractors under which the construction manager coordinates on the owner's behalf. So let's talk again a little bit more about how we get work. Those are the players. If no one knows we exist, how do we get invited to bid on a project? Well, a crucial element is you have to be on the list to receive the RFPs. Well, what is an RFP? That's really important. It is called the Request for Proposals, and this is the document that the architect and the construction manager will put together on behalf of the owner to solicit bids for people who want to work on the project. The owner has the architect prepare the RFP and circulates it to a list of qualified bidders. Remember the words qualified bidders. This is a key element in the selection of the constructor, because under most systems we're going to be looking at the quantitative elements of the process, the price, and the qualitative elements of the process, the skills and experience of the bidder. So if you want to find out who's got work out there for construction, enr.construction.com is a great site to go to and look at the projects that are out for bid. Now, we've talked about that you've got to be on the list to receive RFPs. How do you get on that list? Well, you need to know your qualifications. And in order to know your qualifications, you need to understand your financial strength, your project experience, your technical capabilities of reaching the meeting the needs of the design in order to be able to do the complexities that are included in the design. And you need to be prepared to submit your qualifications to the owners and developers when you learn of projects in their early stages. Now, quite often, this is done through a specific document which the AIA has prepared, which was it's called a submittal of qualifications, and we'll look at that form later on. But it gives you a guideline as to what owners will look for when they're scoring the qualifications of qualified bidders. So remember, in the last slide we talked about that you have to be a qualified bidder in order to get the RFP. So quite often what happens is a project architect will submit a document called an RFQ or publish it in a place of general circulation, such as ENR, Dodge Business News, Dodge Construction, several of these different places that have the ability to reach out to the community and solicit RFQ information. Now, what is an RFQ? Well, that's another one of these anagrams we use, and it stands for Request for Qualifications. So quite often, before there's an RFP, there will be an RFQ sent out on a project. And you need to know what your qualifications are so you can submit your statement of qualifications to get on the list in order to be able to receive the RFP. So you need to be on the list, you need to know your qualifications, and an important part of both of these things is the networking methods that exist within our industry, belonging to CMAA, belonging to NAWIC, the National Association of Women in Construction, belonging to the various professional societies, are all key ways for firms, owners, and developers, as well as architects and constructors, to know your qualifications. So once you've received an RFP, it is crucial that you read that RFP thoroughly. Understand what it is asking, make sure you're clear on the scope, and make sure you are clear on what is being requested as far as submittals for the proposals. The second step is you need to ask questions for clarifications. This is really crucial. If you don't ask requests for clarifications through an RFI process, then you will not get answers. And if you make assumptions, it's highly probable that you will not make the correct ones. So RFI process is really crucial. Oh yeah, you're going to ask, what is an RFI? And an RFI is a specific form that is used to create a request for information. And during the bidding process, and also during the construction process, when there is a concern or a conflict, there is a need to submit an RFI. And an RFI is a written request to clarify an issue, provide additional information, and resolve a conflict in the construction document. So RFIs are submitted to the designer, whether it's through the construction manager or directly to the architect. And it is a request that is written to clarify an issue. The architect will issue an RFI response, and that RFI response will help us to get the clarifications that we need. So once we've got our clarifications, we need to assemble accurate quantities and the costs for materials. We need to be able to discover and apply the local labor productivity factors. And this is a really important element because different areas of the country do different quantities of work at different times. In the market where I did a great deal of work, which was in Chicago, we based masonry walls, concrete block walls, on 300 units per day per mason. So a crew of 4 masons and a laborer could do about 1,200 blocks a day. I was working on a project in central Wisconsin where there were no major contractors. In fact, most of the contractors were part-time people who worked on farming and did construction during their off time. We couldn't find anyone who would guarantee over 175 units a day per man. So our project was budgeted on a normal productivity rate, and because of that we needed to find the right mason. We ended up having to reach out all the way up to a contractor who was up near Green Bay, who made the decision to bring his crew down. We provided housing for the crew, and they were able to do the work at the 300 per day per man productivity rate. But understanding how productivity affects the schedule time for the number of masons that need to work to get the quantity of stuff done. So you've got your accurate quantity of how many square feet of block you need to put in. You need to know what your local labor factors are that can go in, multiply times the number of laborers you need in order to meet the quantity that you've got in your estimate. And then you have to determine your overhead requirements. Now, overhead is the cost of doing business outside of this project. In other words, your superintendent, your foreman, your trades, your materials, your transportation, all of those issues are cost of the project. But your administrative, your executive, your office space, your estimating, all of those elements are your overhead that are not dependent on the particular project. So you've got to determine what the overhead requirement is for you. Then in addition to the overhead, you have to determine what the appropriate profit margin is. You know, everybody thinks it would be great if they made 10%. So if I got $1 million contract, I'd make $100,000. That does not happen. The smaller the contractor, the smaller the contract, the higher the percentage. But when you look at the major commercial projects that are being done, you'll find that most often what's out there is a profit margin of about 3%. So 3% on $1 million project is only 30 grand. That's not a great incentive. But 3% on a $100 million project is $3 million. That can be quite an incentive for a firm. Once you've determined your appropriate profit margin for this project, then you need to prepare your proposal. You need to make sure that your proposal answers all of the questions that are asked for in the RFP. You need to make sure that your proposal addresses any addenda that have come out and also addresses any RFI responses that have been distributed by the architect. And then the final step is you wait and pray. Because everybody who submits their bid, there's going to be a bid opening where everyone will all of a sudden find out how they did. So, key takeaways from this, how do we get work, is you need to remember some things. Number one, it takes hours or days or weeks or months to assemble a proposal. For example, one of the firms that does a great deal of work with the school is a company called Balfour Beatty. They estimate that they invest up to $600,000 for every proposal that they prepare. And they anticipate that they're going to get about 1 out of every 5 proposals they submit. So you can see the commitment that it takes to build these proposals. No one pays you for that. That's part of your cost of doing business, part of your overhead in your projects. So whether it takes you hours to put together the proposal or weeks or months, you need to be able to afford to assemble the crew that's capable of assembling that proposal. Then, you have to remember it only takes seconds to determine the low bid. Last quarter, we had 27 students sitting in the room. They had all submitted their cupcake proposals. We opened the first envelope, and about 20 of the 27 students, you could hear the "ah" and see their shoulders slump, because immediately they knew that that price was lower than the price they submitted. So it's important also to remember that when you're submitting your proposal, besides the price, what value can you add to the owner? What skills or experience do you have that makes your qualifications unique for this particular project? And also, are there alternatives that you can propose that set you aside from the rest of the herd? This is a really important element. With that, we're going to end this second module, and you can take a little break.